with the technology coming in and everything being, I mean, even we have the trucks going to be roboticized by who is it? Tesla? Is it Tesla?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be
Tesla.
surprised.
Yeah, I mean, so there's 30% of blue collar jobs again. I understand about 30% as truck drivers somehow involved in the trucking and delivery business. So there goes those jobs. So all those people can't provide for their families. There's some people I see, some social advocates who are saying, well, provide a minimum salary for society. Give everybody a minimum salary. Well, who's going to pay for that?
And on top of that, what's going to happen to the prices of everything? If everyone can have a baseline, then the prices of everything is going to go up, right? People never think about the economic impacts.
Well, you're exactly right. And where I've seen that happen is with, I can remember, like I was saying, when I was a kid, we lived on one salary, my father's salary. Okay. And my mom stayed home, and my dad had a great life because he came home, his dinner was ready. And I don't think my mom felt subservient or anything else like that, like the feminists might tell you. My mom loved her job, and this was her job, and she called it her job. I have to work. This is my job, you know. And she was happy with that. She had a great life, and so did my father, because he didn't have to come home and wash the dishes and help make the dinner and change the baby's diaper and whatever else. Okay, he came home and he relaxed. He'd worked hard all day, and he had a clear mind when he went to work. So everything was calmer then. That's one thing. Okay, but we have a situation now. So at that time, I remember a friend of mine, his mother started to work, which was one of the first I remember. And so she was working. So now he had two parents working. But I remember we used to go to his house and hang out and got into all kinds of mischief that we weren't supposed to be doing. Okay, so nobody was home. No more supervision, right? What are you going to do? You're a couple of kids. I mean, at that time he was a teenager, and so was I. And we could basically blast the music where the neighbors complained, and smoke a little something and have a good time.
Yeah.
So have friends over. I mean, the parents never had hide nor hair. What the hell was going on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They were both working, especially in the summer, right? Because you'd have the whole summer off. So. And we'd have girls over and all kinds of stuff going on. It's crazy. But it was the 70s and that, I mean, people were having fun. But I mean, all that aside, so at that point in time, if you had two salaries, man, you were really ahead, because everything was designed for one salary.
Exactly.
And then we have got into the 80s, right? We started to have this inflation in the economy, and the price of housing and everything went up. So now you actually have a situation where, in order to live like one salary back then, you have to have two salaries now, because they've inflated the cost of housing. I mean, you go buy a house in any city in North America, you're talking anywhere between what, 150 and $250 million, and that might not even get you much in some cities. Yeah. If you go into, say, LA or San Francisco, you're probably talking about $500,000. So it's actually had a negative impact, and then now we're caught in a trap, because now you need two salaries to provide for that family, and now on top of it, you got to pay for daycare for those kids. Unless you're fortunate enough to come from an Asian family and grandma takes care of the kids. But most Western women, they don't want to do it. They don't want to take care of the kids, right? So the grandchildren, basically have to go off to some strangers. And then you have a whole uncomfortable thing with that, because you end up with a socialization that goes on. And my theory, I call these the daycare generation. And my theory about the daycare generation are all these social Marxists who bought into this stuff that's been pumped into them from the school, because they didn't have the protection that parental guidance would have given them earlier on in life. They're basically defenseless, right? And they're doing the universities are right now doing the old Socratic corrupting the youth thing. And I one of the things I mentioned in the book is I wish they had the integrity of Socrates and dealt with it in the same way after conviction.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, like Socrates was convicted. You're not familiar with the story, or some of
hemlock.
Your
he just said, "I stand by my views. I drink the hemlock.
I stand by my views," right? And one of the charges against him was corrupting the youth. And I look at the universities today. I mean, your job as a professor at a university, if I'm paying for my kid to go to university, you better damn well be teaching my kid to have an open mind, to look at things, to be analytical, to be scientific in its approach to things, right? Yeah. And so what they're doing is a betrayal. It's a breach of fiduciary responsibility. I think you could probably make a lawsuit against that. Someone could make a lawsuit against that and sue the universities for breach of fiduciary responsibility and say, you know what, your fiduciary responsibility was to open my child's mind, not to give them all kinds of social ideas that are inappropriate. You know, this as I called it before, the socialist maybe a strip, you know, where you just go around in a circle and it's completely nihilistic. It really, if you're going to go around playing victim, you're basically heading towards suicide.
Yeah.
Because you have to move past things, right? You have to keep going. Because bad things happen to everybody. And that's just the reality of life.
Yeah.
That's just reality of life. And it's even worse than that. I mean, some of these, as you say, some individuals in university may, for the most part, come from a more privileged background. So you get some people, for example, who come from a working class family or an abusive family or other issues. I mean, people start with issues. Like some people have bad issues where they can never get over them. You know, I met a lady not too long ago, and she told me the story about her childhood, and it was full of abuse and all kinds of horrible things happened to her. And she still hasn't gotten over it, and she's like 60 some years old. Like people still live with this shit, man. Like you and I, like from what I've seen of your videos of your life, our parents may not have been perfect, but we know, at least I know with regards to my parents, that they did the best they could with the tools they had, and they were sincere in what they did. You know, and they may not have been perfect. My parents made the mistakes too. Everybody's does. And I've made mistakes with my own kids. And we always will, because we're human and we're full of fallacies.
Exactly.
And sometimes, you know what? Sometimes we just don't know any better.
Yeah.
You know, you go through life, and then you start to find that, you know, like for example, give you another example. My father was a very temperamental man, very strict. My mother just had to say, "Wait till your father gets home, or I'll tell your father," and that struck the fear of God in us. Okay. And that's good, because I had 3 brothers, and we never had the cops show up at our door or anything else, because we were always afraid of our dad. But my dad never hit us. He wasn't a violent man. He was just very verbally assaulting. Okay. Authoritarian, very authoritarian, like this German thing, like very that kind of thing. You know, the German thing. Yeah. Everybody knows that, especially that generation. Maybe not so much today, but in the old days. I mean, he was a child in the war, so he never fought in the war or anything like that. But he still had that way with him. And but I thought about this for a long time. Why was he like that? It's so hard to make a connection with this man. I never told my dad that I loved him, and I would have felt awkward about it.
Yeah.
You know? But then I realized some years later, actually probably in the last 5 or 10 years or so, it finally came to me. My dad had PTSD.
Oh.
He lived through the war, and he was a little kid. And I remember him telling me some stories about, oh, you know, like there'd be dead bodies all over the streets, and people were killed, and I saw people getting shot. And when I was a kid, we used to play with bombs, and we used to open them up and used to take the powder out of them, and they used to light the powder, and like all kinds of shit. And he said him and his friends, I remember him telling him a story about once him and his friends were picking up these bombs after the war, and they would play with the bombs, and he said they had different sizes. They figured out how to open them up.
Oh my God.
And how to take some powder and shit out of them. I don't know, I don't know the details of this, but I just know what he told me. And he said one day his friend came with this great big mother of a bomb, and he said, "You do that one, I'm going home." So yeah, not to say the little ones couldn't kill him also, right? Yeah. but it's just to say that if you live through that, and I remember what the kind of things that would upset my father. For example, if you were walking down the stairs and you tripped and fell, and you almost got hurt or something, he'd shout at you like, "What are you doing? Why don't you pay attention?" Like just like a total freak out.
Yeah.
Right? That's PTSD. Right? That's like a fear. And I could see. One thing I did realize later on was that he was a man who lived with fear all the time. He lived very conservatively, very cautiously, didn't want any more crap in his life. Like he just had enough. He wanted a quiet life, a family life, and that's it. And anyone who makes bullshit in his life is out of his life.
Yeah.
So that's the way he operated. And you realize these things as you get older. Sometimes you go, you know, I used to think for years, like, why was my dad like that? And then I realized he was like that because he was traumatized as a kid, and he was always afraid that something bad would happen.
Yeah.
And when any incident that happened that could create something negative or bad in his life, he like it struck terror in him, like
Mhm.
no, you know.
Yeah.
And so, was my dad a bad person? No. Was he a bad parent? No. He had his heart in the right place, you know, because this was from his experience, from where he came from. You know, this is what he wanted. I mean, it's the same thing I imagined you talking about your parents with, for example, the Chinese Cultural Revolution and so forth. I'm sure they've seen a lot of things and they go, you know what? Whoa, you go to school, you do this, you do that,
Yeah.
because
They probably still have PTSD from it because both of their
Mhm,
parents were not around for many years during the Cultural Revolution. So
mhm,
it fucks them up too. Like my
yeah,
dad just played around for many years fighting people. So I'm sure he's like, oh,
yeah,
I don't want my kid to play around fighting people all the time. So like little things get him going. Like you talk about like you falling, your dad
mhm,
like freaking out. I'm the same.
yeah,
Like, I told that story on my channel, but like it wasn't just that, but like whenever I'd be clumsy, my dad would like insult my intelligence.
mhm,
And it's like, why do you react that much?
yeah,
Everyone bumps their head or does that. Even as adults, I bumped my head the other day. But like as a
yeah,
kid, when I bumped my head, my dad would automatically call me retarded or something like that. And I'm
mm.
like, why? What prompted it? Was probably because maybe back in the day, if when he was growing up, if you fell, some other gang would come and kick your ass. So you had to learn very quickly not to be clumsy.
It may be also, Jerry, a protective thing. Like, he doesn't want you to get hurt because he loves you. He can't express his love, and his way of expressing his love is, straighten up. Like, don't let that happen to you. Be careful.
Yeah.
you know. So I mean, that's the way I kind of took it from my dad. That it was kind of like, like, pay attention to what you're doing, and watch out. And I still remember, like, things. I heard the Chinese expression where, if a nail's sticking out, hammer it down or something. I
Mhm.
remember some expression to that effect. And I've watched some of your videos about that, and it's true. Like, when you're an intelligent person and you get introduced into companies, which is something that I've seen in over the years working with companies, basically you have to toe the line.
Oh yeah.
And I was working with one company, for example, as a project manager, and what they were doing is they were underbidding every job that they did intentionally. And these clients were, right, emailing and whatever, that they were upset because they just got this bill for ABC, which should have been included in the original agreement and so forth. And what my job was expected to be was to lie to everybody.
Wow.
Okay, and I had a big issue with that. Like I said, I think I have, a lot of integrity, and so I started to tell the clients the truth. I started to apologize and say, well, I'm really sorry that wasn't included in the quote, and da 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 da. Well, I wasn't long there. So, I mean, you know what? I don't know. My integrity may kill me in the end, but at least I live with my integrity. You
Yeah.
know, um, there's so many people who are sellouts. It's not funny. And then these same people who are sellouts then look at the world and say, why is the world so rotten? And the world made me this way. And why does nobody have integrity? Well, it starts with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we don't have a lot of impact as individuals, unless, say, we're some kind of political activist or something. But we could do something about it, and we could refuse. I mean, it's just like we had the Nuremberg trials at the end of the war, which is somewhat hypocritical because there were a lot of war crimes committed. Not so much on the American part. The impression I got from my father's side of the family is the Americans were actually had a lot of integrity and decency. They really liked the Americans because they treated them well.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
the
the Russians.
Russians. Oh
Oh
yeah.
man, they
Yeah.
were brutal. The Russians were like mass rapists and brutalizers. And even in Poland today, they've recently announced that they're going to start taking down all these Soviet era monuments because, the way that they were treated at the end of the war, they still remember.
Yeah.
They've never forgotten. I mean, I had well, my grandmother passed away, and even on her deathbed, I mean, she was still cursing about the Russians, and she never told me about it before, but I'm quite convinced that she was raped at some point,
Oh man.
probably quite extensively.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, and I always remember when she would describe the war, she always said, "Oh, the horror of the war. Just the horror, especially at the end, it
Mhm.
was horrible." I mean, but anyhow, I mean, This was like I said, I digress a lot.
No, this is fun. I mean,
Uh,
we're just having a little good conversation.
yeah. So anyway, I mean, this was the thing that they always went on about. I mean, even this is one of the things, like for example, in writing a book like this, like the Libertarian uh, Charter here, is that it's something that maybe goes back to my childhood in that my mother was Canadian. I was raised in Canada, and my father was German, and he was raised in Germany. And my grandparents, my one side of the family was German, the other side was Canadian. And I heard two sides to this thing.
I see.
You know, I mean, what I heard from the German side was, Hitler was good at first. It was the Depression. Nobody had jobs. He built the Autobahns. He built all of these highways. He gave social benefits. My grandmother had told me that her parents had their first vacation paid for by the state.
Wow.
They had some kind of state holiday things. She said she was really grateful for that because, her parents had worked very hard and struggled through the Depression and so forth, and the First World War and so forth. And he gave them, the vacation. So she said, well, that's their first vacation, and they had a great time. And there was certain things. I had a friend, a German friend. He's dead now. He's 80 some years old, and I remember him living through the war. And he said, "Mark," he says, "you don't realize, but in that Nazi state, there was a sense of identity, of purpose. And even as a child, he was a child. He said he felt like part of it, like he was part of like the Hitler Youth and that, right? And I mean, the whole thing gets bogged down. But the same guy, he said to me, he says, you know what? He said, German people have been known for a lot of great things in history, great philosophy, thought, and scientific discoveries and so forth. But he said, all we're known by now is that stupid war. Like we've been disgraced, right? And there's a lot of German people of good conscience who, who felt bad about that. I mean, my father never talked about it. He never talked. He lost his father in the Russian front.
Wow.
So I mean, it was in 1942. I think probably Stalingrad or something like that. I got hit by I wrote the German government and I asked for a copy of his war record and so forth. They basically told me, he got a number of promotions during the war. But anyhow, he got hit by a artillery shell. But getting over to the book, so we have I was raised and I had these different views. I had this thing here, and then my mother's side, like I told you, my mother, never married a damn German, and it was so hard during the war, and so I heard about that, and uncles who went and fought in Europe. So I mean, I'm on two conflicting sides of the great conflict of the 20th century, right? But I'm raised in Canada, so I'm kind of in the middle, right? I don't speak German or anything. Matter of fact, I don't even speak French. Well, not much, a little bit of French, but so I'm this English-speaking guy who's like these divided cultural things. And then I found out even that my father's side, he had like some Jewish blood, and all of those ancestors got killed. And so the only one who survived the war was my father. So yeah, I mean, the Nazi thing it's not exactly carte blanche as people think. I mean, there's a guy who wrote a book called Hitler's Soldiers, Hitler's Jews, and it's about Jewish people who served in the German army during Second World War. Wow. Right. So this guy writes this story, and I think that my grandfather on my father's side would have been one of those. He was a part Jewish guy, but I mean, you got to remember the Jewish people had been in Germany for several centuries. They fought on the side of Germany in the First World War, and they were members of the government and the cabinet and different departments. I mean, this anti-Semitism that Hitler brought in was not really an overall social phenomenon. I think there was a bit of social jealousy, just because of their economic success, right? Yeah. I mean, when my friends who are Jewish have explained to me some of it, and some of the things are just like wonderful, like the belief in education. I've always been a big believer in education and in knowledge and in encouraging your children to do that. I mean, if everybody did that in the world, in every culture, I mean, the world would be a far better place today. As long as you're not brainwashing them with indoctrination, right?
Exactly.
And
by the way, Mark, a lot of the audience in the live chats requesting you sit up a little. They say it's like you're disappearing. Yeah. So yeah, just because a lot of them are mentioned, they're like, oh, it looks like Mark is disappearing.
I'm sinking down in the quicksand. No.
Yeah. So that's better.
Am I okay now?
Yeah, you're better now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many people do you have on right now?
Right now we have 20 people tuning in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're gonna rebroadcast later?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to rebroadcast. It'll reach a lot of people, but people listening
Okay.
to it live are the OGs, of course. They're looking at
Yeah,
this and
sure.
giving us their feedback. There's a lot of interesting feedback. Like a lot of people are talking about the Islam question too on here. So
Yeah.
somebody got
Well,
mad at me for saying that I'm saying Merkel has no Merkel because she has no children. She doesn't think as much about the future of Germany and the EU. So someone got mad at me, but everyone likes you, so you're doing well.
well, that's good to hear. Well, I am a working class guy. I come from a working class family, and I've tried to come up with something because I'm not. I've always been intellectual. I've read a lot and I've studied a lot over the years. I've pretty much self-educated. I've gone to university, but not extensively. Just certain courses I've taken and completed and got certified for. But like in project management, for example. But I've always had an intellectual interest and intellectual leanings.